She hid her medical degree to marry the billionaire CEO. Now she's the only brain surgeon who can save his daughter. The hospital corridor exploded into chaos when Lily's small body slipped from her father's arms and struck the polished floor. Her eyes fluttered once, then closed, her head tilting at an angle that didn't feel right. William dropped to his knees beside her, calling her name again and again, his voice cracking as nearby families froze in place, unsure whether to move or pray. Machines were dragged in within seconds. A nurse slammed a cart against the wall while trying to position it close enough to Lily's chest. Numbers blinked wildly across the monitor screen. The quiet hum of the building vanished beneath sharp alerts that cut through every room in the wing. Doctors appeared from nowhere, barking instructions, pushing bystanders back, their shoes squealing as they turned corners too fast. William stood, hands shaking, blocking the hallway as they tried to roll Lily away. "Please," he shouted, grabbing the sleeve of a physician. "She was talking to me 5 minutes ago. She said her head felt heavy. That's all she said. Please don't let her go like this." One of the senior doctors pulled him aside, lowering his voice so only William could hear. His eyes carried the weight of someone who already knew the odds. "There's only one surgeon in the world who has ever made it through this operation," he said quietly. William laughed once, a hollow sound that startled even himself. "That's impossible. You're telling me this like it's a story. This is my child." Across the hall, Juana Rao stood rooted to the floor, her grocery bag slipping from her fingers as oranges rolled away unnoticed. She had come to the hospital only to pick up Lily's school form from William after work. Now she watched nurses race past with her stepdaughter's body, her chest tightening so hard she could barely draw air. Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized in a single terrifying moment that you might not truly know who they are? Have you ever trusted a person so completely that you never asked the questions that could have saved everything? William wiped his eyes and turned back toward the doctor, unaware that the woman who shared his home, his table, and his mornings stood only a few steps away, holding a truth that could change the next hour of his life. If this story has already touched something inside you, tap the like button, subscribe to Mr. Cooper Stories, and leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. The hallway no longer felt like a place meant for healing. It became a narrow runway of urgency where every second pressed down harder than the last. A young nurse slid a heart monitor toward Lily, her hands steady but her eyes betraying fear. As the sensors connected, the machine responded with jagged numbers that jumped far too fast, then stalled, then jumped again. Two doctors leaned over the gurney, trading rapid instructions in clipped phrases. One called for imaging, another shouted for medication that hadn't been used in years. A third ran ahead to clear the elevator, holding the doors open with his foot as orderly sprinted forward, pushing the bed so hard its wheels rattled against the tile. Family members along the corridor flattened themselves against the walls. Some whispered prayers. Others stared in silent shock. Every alert from the machines echoed inside William's head like a hammer striking glass, while Juana followed several steps behind, unable to keep up, unable to look away, feeling something she had not felt since her hardest days in medicine. The fear that no amount of knowledge could slow the clock. William ran beside the gurney until his lungs burned. His jacket slipped from his shoulders and fell somewhere behind him, forgotten. He shouted Lily's name into the narrow space above her face, as if his voice alone could keep her anchored to the world. "Help her! Somebody tell me what's wrong with my daughter!" he cried, his words breaking apart before they reached the ceiling. He tried to grab her hand, but a nurse blocked him gently, shaking her head with regret in her eyes. The doors to the emergency unit swung open, and the staff rushed Lily inside while William stumbled to a stop. For a moment he stood alone in the hall, fists clenched at his sides, his voice echoing uselessly in a place that suddenly felt too large to hold his fear. William paced outside the restricted doors, running his hands through his hair until it stood in every direction. A doctor stepped out long enough to glance at a chart, then leaned toward another physician and spoke in a voice meant to be hidden. "There's only one surgeon in the world who's ever survived this procedure," he said. The sentence landed like a weight on William's chest. He stopped moving, staring at the man as if he had misheard. "What do you mean, one?" William asked. "This is a children's hospital. Don't you have teams for this?" The doctor hesitated, choosing his words with care. "We will try everything we can," he replied, and in that pause before the last word, William felt hope begin to slide out of reach. Juana stood at the far end of the corridor, her back against the wall, her palms pressed flat, as if the building itself were the only thing keeping her upright. People hurried past her, without notice, coats brushing her sleeves, yet she felt separated from them by something she could not cross. She knew the look on the doctor's face. She had worn it herself once, long ago, when words became too heavy to carry out loud. Her heart hammered so fiercely that she feared someone nearby might hear it. The truth she'd kept locked away for years now demanded to be seen, and she was no longer certain she had the strength to hold it back. Have you ever shared a home with someone and believed you knew every corner of their life, only to learn that a whole world existed beyond your view? Not because they meant to deceive you, but because some parts of the heart feel too heavy to place in another person's hands. William thought he understood the woman he married. He loved her kindness, her quiet humor, the way she cared for Lily without asking for anything in return. Yet in that hallway, with his child behind locked doors, he was about to discover that love alone does not always reveal the deepest truths. The doctors rushed past William again, faces set with urgency, speaking in coded terms meant for trained ears. He caught fragments of phrases he did not understand, words that carried finality he refused to accept. Just a few steps away, Juana's gaze followed every movement through the narrow window in the door. Her fingers curled as if she were already holding surgical tools, though none were there. The person they were searching for across the world was not on a plane, not in another city, not waiting to be called. She was standing in the same hallway, breathing the same air, holding back a truth that could change, whether Lily saw another morning. Before this story moves any further, take a moment to support Mr. Cooper's stories. Press the like button so this message can reach more hearts, subscribe so you never miss a story that lifts and challenges you, and leave a comment telling us whether you believe people should share every part of who they are, or if some truths are worth protecting until the moment truly demands them. The charity gala filled the upper floor of the Kingsley Hotel with polished shoes, silk dresses, and voices trained to sound important. Servers glided between tables holding crystal glasses that cost more than most families earned in a month. At the far end of the room, a live quartet played soft music that barely cut through the steady roar of conversation. Every guest here wore a name that opened doors. Company founders, heirs, investors who spoke in numbers that could move markets. It was the kind of evening that thrived on visibility, being seen, being recognized, being admired. And yet, within all that display, one woman stood in a simple blue dress near the edge of the room, carrying herself with the quiet of someone who had nothing to prove. Juana held a glass of lemonade with both hands, not because she needed the support, but because it gave her something to do while the rest of the room competed for attention. She stayed close to the wall, letting groups pass in front of her without interruption. No one asked her name, no one wondered why she was there. To them, she blended into the background as easily as the curtains behind her. She did not mind. Years of learning to step aside had shaped her comfort with being unseen. Her eyes traveled over the crowd without judgment, settling now and then on familiar faces, then moving on again, content to observe rather than perform. Two women near the champagne tower leaned closer together, their laughter light but their words edged with judgment. "Do you know her?" one asked, nodding toward Juana. The other glanced briefly, then shrugged. Probably someone's assistant who wandered into the wrong section. "Look at her shoes." They smiled politely in her direction, the way people do when they think kindness costs nothing, then returned to listing private schools and vacation homes as if the room were a contest no one had officially announced. Juana heard every word. She always did. Yet her face remained calm, her posture steady, her silence more powerful than any reply. From the raised platform near the stage, William Kingsley finished thanking donors and turned slightly away from the microphone. Applause filled the room, but he barely noticed. His gaze drifted past the shining tables and polished smiles, searching not for business partners, but for one familiar face that grounded him more than any contract ever had. He moved his head slowly, scanning each corner with a patience that suggested this mattered more than the event itself. When he finally spotted Juana near the wall, a faint smile softened his expression, as though the entire evening had been leading him back to that one quiet place. William stepped down from the platform and crossed the room, weaving through clusters of guests who reached out to stop him with questions and greetings. He answered none of them. His focus stayed fixed on Juana. When he reached her, he lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You look like you're planning an escape," he said with a soft smile. She returned it, a brief curve of her lips that held both humor and warmth. "I was wondering if hiding in a place like this is considered bad manners." "Only if you're not hiding with me," he replied, offering his arm. To everyone watching, it was a simple moment, a powerful man greeting his quiet wife, nothing more. No one in the room suspected that the woman at his side carried a history that did not fit the neat labels placed upon her. She listened as he whispered a joke meant to ease her discomfort, yet her thoughts drifted elsewhere, to halls far removed from chandeliers and gala dinners. The world saw what it wanted, a billionaire and the woman who shared his name. What it could not see was the distance between who Juana appeared to be and who she truly was. As William guided her closer to the center of the room, light from the overhead fixtures scattered across the polished floor and lifted into the air like drifting stars. One beam caught Juana's eyes, making them shine for a brief second before she lowered her gaze. No one else noticed the way that light revealed something deeper, not vanity, not pride, but a calm strength that did not belong in rooms built on wealth alone. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the room itself had paused, unaware that the woman standing quietly beneath its glow carried a story far greater than anything written in the program. The cafe was nearly empty when Juana pushed through the door, the soft bell above it announcing her arrival to no one in particular. It was well past midnight, the hour when the city finally loosened its grip on the day, and even the late-night workers had started drifting home. She chose the booth farthest from the counter and let herself sink into the seat. The weight in her shoulders did not ease. 12 hours inside the operating wing had a way of settling into the bones, the kind of fatigue sleep alone could not erase. Her hands rested on the table, steady now, though earlier they had trembled with effort after the last patient was rolled out. The smell of coffee wrapped around her like a memory from another life. She stared at the steam rising from a mug left behind by someone who had already gone, watching it fade until there was nothing left but an empty cup and a room full of quiet. The door opened again, letting in a rush of cold air and rain. A man stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket, his umbrella folded uselessly in his hand, one of its metal ribs bent at an odd angle. He glanced around as if surprised the place was still open, then noticed Juana's booth and walked toward the empty seat across from her. "Sorry," he said, holding up the broken umbrella with a tired grin. It decided it was done for the night. She looked at the dripping fabric and smiled gently. "It seems to have worked harder than most people do." He laughed under his breath, the sound of someone who needed that small moment more than he realized. They spoke first about nothing that mattered: the weather, the way the cafe stayed open later than it should, how the city looked different after dark. Their voices stayed low, careful not to disturb the stillness around them. Then he asked, almost without thinking, "What keeps you out so late?" Juana paused, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Some days don't know when to end," she said. He nodded, as if he understood that more deeply than he wanted to admit. The talk shifted from polite to personal, from passing comments to shared truths neither had planned to reveal. When he asked what she did for work, Juana's eyes drifted to the rain streaking the window beside them. The answer rested on her tongue, familiar and heavy, yet she chose a different path. "I help people get through hard days," she said instead. He studied her face, searching for details she did not offer, then accepted the answer with a small nod. It was enough, at least for the moment, and the space she left unfilled seemed to draw him closer rather than push him away. When the conversation turned back to him, he shrugged in a way that suggested the question was too large for the hour. "I'm just trying to keep things from falling apart," he said with a faint smile that never reached his eyes. She waited, giving him room to explain more, but he chose not to. Whatever weighed on him stayed locked behind polite words and careful humor. Instead, he asked about her favorite books, her favorite meals, the small things people share when the bigger ones feel unsafe to touch. Time loosened its grip while they talked. The rain softened outside, no longer pounding the glass, but resting there like a curtain they had closed against the world. They laughed at stories that weren't meant to be funny, and grew quiet over thoughts that had waited a long time to be heard. Neither of them noticed when the waitress refilled their cups without being asked. What mattered was the simple comfort of being understood without explanation, the rare feeling of sitting across from someone who did not need you to perform or pretend. In that small booth, two tired strangers found relief in the presence of another soul carrying more than it showed. At last, the clock above the counter marked a new hour, and the cafe began preparing to close. William stood first, opening the door for her as the final drops of rain slipped from the awning outside. "Maybe we'll meet again," he said, not as a request, but as a hope he wasn't ready to name. Juana stepped onto the sidewalk and turned back toward him. Their smiles were gentle, unspoken promises carried in the still air between them. Then they went separate ways, neither aware that this brief meeting would one day define everything they believed about love. Their time together unfolded in small, ordinary places that most couples rushed past on their way to something louder. They met at parks where children fed crumbs to stubborn birds. They shared sandwiches from paper wrappers while sitting on steps warmed by afternoon sun. Once, they spent an entire evening wandering a street market, tasting foods they could barely pronounce, and laughing when neither of them guessed right. There were no grand plans, no reservations made weeks in advance. When one of them was late, the other waited without complaint. When the day ended early, it never felt unfinished. Those modest hours carried a quiet joy that neither had found in the lives they had left behind. William often asked gentle questions about her work, not pressing for details but showing interest in the way people do when they care. Juana answered with careful phrases, enough to be honest without opening doors she was not ready to walk through. She spoke of long days and tired nights, of helping people stand back up after life pushed them down. What she never mentioned were the halls filled with specialists, the research papers that carried her name, or the difficult decisions she had once made under lights far brighter than any cafe could offer. To him, she was simply Juana, and for now, she needed that to be enough. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the last of the daylight fade, William's voice lowered. "Can I tell you something that sounds foolish?" he asked. She turned toward him, waiting. "I've had people come into my life who only wanted what I could give them," he said. "Not who I was, but what I could provide. It makes you question every smile, every compliment. You start wondering if anyone would stay if all of that disappeared." Juana listened without interrupting, her heart tightening at the honesty he had finally allowed himself to share. She took a breath before answering, the way people do when truth feels heavier than silence. "My fear is the opposite," she said. "That someone will fall in love with the version of me they imagine, not the one who exists when the day is over." He studied her, unsure of what lay behind those words. "Why would anyone invent you?" he asked softly. "Because sometimes it's easier to love what you expect than what is real," she replied, and in that moment he sensed there was far more beneath her calm than she had ever shown. William reached for her hand, not with urgency, but with care. "Then let's promise something," he said. "No pretending, no masks. Whatever we are, we'll be honest with that, even when it's not impressive." Juana held his gaze, feeling the weight of what he offered. It was not a grand vow spoken before witnesses, but a quiet agreement formed in fading daylight. She squeezed his hand once in answer, sealing a promise neither fully understood yet both needed. If this chapter has made you think about your own journey, pause for a moment and share with us in the comments which part of Juana and William's growing bond has touched you the most so far. Your words matter here, and they help the story reach others who may need it just as much as you do. Juana met Lily on a quiet afternoon when the house felt too large for its own memories. William had warned her that his daughter was shy, that she carried the absence of her mother in ways children could not name. Still, nothing prepared Juana for the small figure standing halfway down the hallway, clutching the strap of her backpack like a lifeline. "This is Juana," William said gently. "She's the friend I told you about." Lily didn't answer. She studied Juana's shoes, then her hands, then her face, searching for something she had not yet learned how to define. Juana crouched slowly to her level, not speaking right away, letting the silence breathe. "I like your backpack," she said at last. "It looks like it's been on a lot of adventures." Lily's grip loosened just a little. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, a single cookie between them like a treaty neither had signed yet. Lily tilted her head, eyes bright with curiosity. "Do you know how to fix broken toys?" she asked. "I can try," Juana replied, "but sometimes the glue gets on my fingers." Lily considered this carefully. "Do you get mad when people make mistakes?" "Only when they stop trying," Juana said. The girl nodded as if that answer passed some unseen test. The first Saturday they spent together, Juana woke early to the sound of small footsteps padding across the hallway. Lily stood in the doorway of the kitchen, hair tangled from sleep, eyes wide with hope. "Dad says you make pancakes," she said. Juana blinked in surprise, then smiled. "I do," she replied, already reaching for a bowl. They mixed batter side by side, flour dusting the counter in their hands. Lily laughed when one of the pancakes came out shaped more like a heart than a circle, and Juana pretended it was on purpose. By the time William wandered in, rubbing his eyes, the kitchen smelled like warmth and beginnings. Evening settled into a pattern that no one had planned, yet everyone depended on. After homework and quiet play, Lily would appear in the doorway of Juana's room carrying a book too big for her arms. "Just one story," she would plead, already climbing onto the bed. Juana read slowly, giving each character a voice, letting Lily interrupt whenever a part confused her or made her laugh. When the book closed, Juana brushed the hair from Lily's face and waited until her breathing softened into sleep, the way mothers have done for centuries without ever being taught. The words slipped out on a rainy afternoon while Lily was coloring at the dining table. "Mom, Juana, can you help me find the blue crayon?" she asked without looking up. Juana froze, the mug in her hand hovering just above the table. Lily finally glanced up, realizing what she had said, her cheeks turning pink. I know you're not my mom," she rushed, "but you feel like—" Juana knelt beside her chair and wrapped her in a careful hug. No explanations were needed. Some titles are earned long before they are spoken. William paused outside the doorway, unseen by either of them, watching Juana hold Lily close as the afternoon light settled across the room. He felt something ease inside him that he had carried since his wife passed, the constant ache that told him he was failing at filling a space too large for one heart alone. For the first time in years, he no longer felt as though he was merely surviving each day for his daughter. He was watching her grow again, not just endure. And in that quiet moment, he understood that the family he thought he had lost was being rebuilt in front of him. Juana learned early that quiet did not mean safety. She grew up in a narrow apartment where the walls were thin enough to carry every argument from the neighbors next door and every worry her parents tried to keep from her. Her mother worked late cleaning offices that never remembered her name. Her father patched together jobs that paid in cash and promises, neither of which lasted long. There were nights when dinner was whatever remained at the bottom of the cupboard, and mornings when Juana went to school, pretending that hunger was simply a part of growing up. She became skilled at reading the room, knowing when to speak, when to disappear, when to become small so others could feel large. Books were her escape. She read everything the library would let her carry home, memorizing words she did not yet understand, building a private world where limits did not apply. In those pages she found people who healed, who repaired what others broke, who used their minds to protect instead of harm. It was there, long before any classroom welcomed her, that she began shaping the dreams she never dared say aloud. Juana entered medical school with grades that could not be ignored, yet she felt invisible the moment she walked through the doors. Study groups formed around her without invitation. Professors mispronounced her name even after she corrected them gently. Patients often asked if she was lost or waiting for someone more qualified. Once, during a clinical round, a classmate whispered that she was probably there because of a quota. The words stayed with her long after the lecture ended. She began to work twice as hard, not to be praised, but to avoid becoming the example others expected her to be. She learned to keep her head down, her answers precise, her confidence private. In halls meant for learning, she was learning something else entirely. That excellence was not always enough to earn belonging. By the time Juana reached her residency, she had mastered the art of patience. Attendings often handed complex cases to others while assigning her tasks that felt closer to errands than to training. When she offered ideas during team meetings, they were acknowledged with polite nods and then quietly replaced by the same suggestions spoken later by someone else. One night, a senior surgeon questioned her in front of the entire unit after she corrected a minor error in a chart. The room fell silent, waiting for her to retreat. She didn't. She calmly explained her reasoning, backed by evidence she had already memorized. The room shifted, not with respect, but with surprise, as if they were seeing her clearly for the first time. The case arrived without warning, a child whose condition left entire teams unsure where to begin. Surgeons from different departments filled the viewing gallery, whispering options that all carried the same unspoken ending. Juana stood at the edge of the room, listening, calculating, seeing patterns others overlooked. She asked for a chance no one expected her to take. When silence followed, she spoke again, calmly, clearly, outlining an approach that had not yet been tried in their hospital. The room did not answer her with applause. It answered with hesitation. Hours later, when the operation ended and the patient was stable, the same people who had doubted her stared at the monitors in disbelief. Her method worked. It was not luck. It was preparation meeting the moment everyone else feared. Recognition followed that breakthrough whether Juana wanted it or not. Invitations arrived from institutions she had once only read about. Her name appeared in journals, attached to language that praised her skill in ways that felt unreal after years of being overlooked. Yet with every headline, she felt a growing distance between who she was becoming and who she had always needed to be. The attention brought new eyes that did not see her. They studied her. They wanted her story trimmed into something easy to sell, something that fit neatly into boxes she had spent her whole life escaping, so she made a choice that surprised even herself. She stepped away from the spotlight, declined interviews, changed hospitals, and began answering questions about her work with vague phrases that hid the truth without lying outright. Her credentials did not vanish. She simply stopped leading with them. Juana wanted a life that could not be reduced to headlines or expectations. She wanted mornings where the loudest sound was the kettle on the stove, evenings that ended with a book instead of a boardroom. The skills she carried inside her were not meant to define every conversation she entered, so she chose simplicity with intention. She rented modest apartments, shopped in ordinary stores, let strangers decide who she was without correction. It was not hiding out of shame, but out of self-respect. For the first time since childhood, she felt free, not because the world knew her name, but because it didn't need to. The first time Lily mentioned the pain, it sounded harmless. They were in the living room on a Sunday afternoon, the kind that felt too quiet to be memorable. Juana sat on the floor helping Lily finish a puzzle, while William folded laundry on the couch, half listening to a sports game murmuring in the background. Lily pressed the heel of her palm against her forehead and squinted. "Mom, Juana," she said softly, "my head feels funny." Juana looked up. "Funny how?" Lily searched for the right word. Children never speak in the language doctors expect. They speak in colors, in feelings, in fragments. "It feels like someone put something heavy in there," she said, tapping the side of her head. "Like when my backpack is too full." Juana tilted her head, studying the girl. Lily had not cried. She had not complained loudly. She had simply stated a fact, the way children do when they don't yet know the meaning of danger. Lily nodded and took a few careful sips, then smiled as if to prove everything was fine. "See, it's okay now." Juana let herself relax just a little. Children had headaches. They skipped naps. They stared at screens too long. Not every discomfort needed a name. But over the next week, the small comments continued. "My head feels tight today. It hurts when I laugh too hard. I don't like the light in the kitchen." Each time, Lily brushed it off as soon as Juana noticed. Each time, Juana felt a faint tug in her chest that she tried to dismiss. She did not want to bring her professional instincts into their home. She had promised herself she would be a mother first, not a diagnostician who saw risk in every shadow. Still, patterns have a way of announcing themselves whether we invite them or not. One morning, Lily refused her pancakes. That had never happened before. She sat at the table with her fork untouched, staring at the plate as if it were something unfamiliar. "Are you not hungry?" Juana asked. Lily shook her head slowly. "My head hurts again." William knelt beside her chair. "Sweetheart, is it bad?" Lily shrugged. "Not bad, just there." That word, there, stayed with Juana long after Lily went to school. Pain that simply existed without cause did not belong to children. It belonged to things that hid until they were too large to ignore. That evening, Lily stumbled while coming down the stairs, catching herself on the railing. She laughed it off, but Juana had already moved across the room. "Are you dizzy?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "A little," Lily admitted, then added quickly, "But I'm okay." Juana did not argue. She carried Lily to the couch and tucked a blanket around her shoulders, telling herself she would call the pediatrician in the morning. That this was probably nothing, that she had earned the right to be wrong sometimes. Later that night, long after Lily had fallen asleep, Juana stood in the doorway watching her chest rise and fall. She counted the breaths, not because she needed to, but because she could not stop on the third night Lily woke screaming. Juana reached her before William did, lifting her from the bed while Lily clutched her head, crying in a way that came from deeper than fear. "It hurts, Mom Juana," she sobbed. "It really hurts, now." Juana felt the floor shift beneath her certainty. She pressed her forehead to Lily's hair, whispering comfort she did not yet believe. The next morning they were at the doctor's office before the doors officially opened. Tests were ordered, notes were taken, reassurances were given in careful tones. By afternoon, Lily insisted she was fine again. She skipped into the house, ahead of them, calling out for her favorite toy as if the past 12 hours had been a dream. William sighed with relief. "Kids are strange," he said with a small laugh. "One minute the world is ending, the next they're building castles out of pillows." Juana forced a smile. Inside her, something refused to settle. 2 days later, Lily stopped in the middle of brushing her teeth and stared at her reflection. "Mom Juana," she called. "Why does the mirror look funny?" Juana hurried to the bathroom. Lily blinked rapidly, swaying slightly as if the room were not staying still. Her instincts no longer waited for permission. She picked Lily up and carried her to the car without explanation. William followed, asking questions she could not yet answer. On the drive to the hospital, Lily rested her head on Juana's shoulder and whispered, almost apologetically, "I don't think my head likes me anymore." Juana pressed her lips together so hard they ached. This was no longer a collection of small moments. It was a story forming, one she had seen before and prayed never to see again, especially not in the child who had taught her what family felt like. By the time they pulled into the emergency entrance, Lily's eyes had closed, her breathing shallow, her hands still clutched in Juana's, and the quiet Sunday they had started with was already gone forever. The sliding doors opened with a sharp hiss, but Juana barely heard it. Her world had narrowed to the weight in her arms and the way Lily's fingers twitched against her sleeve as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. She had carried hundreds of patients through hospital doors before. She knew the posture of emergency, the smell of disinfectant mixed with fear, the cadence of voices that meant trouble was already ahead. Yet nothing in her training prepared her for the way her own body betrayed her now. Her heart beat so loudly she wondered if the triage nurse could hear it. She answered questions automatically, giving Lily's age, her recent symptoms, the timeline of the pain, while another part of her mind screamed that she was saying too much, that she was revealing patterns she had sworn she would never look for in her own home. Don't analyze her, she told herself. Just be her. But the images came anyway. Shadows she had once chased across scans, children whose headaches were never just headaches. She saw them in the way Lily's eyes failed to focus, in the subtle droop at the corner of her mouth, in the hesitation between breaths that no parent was trained to count but every doctor learned to fear. She sat with Lily in a curtained cubicle while nurses moved around them, drawing blood, checking reflexes, whispering updates into small recorders clipped to their uniforms. Lily flinched at each touch, and Juana apologized every time, even though she had not caused any of it. Inside her chest, panic gathered like a storm that did not need clouds to announce itself. She remembered her own childhood nights of pain that had gone unseen because there was no one to listen. She had sworn Lily would never feel alone in suffering. Now she wondered if love could do anything at all against what was coming. William paced outside the curtain, stopping every few seconds to peek in. Juana caught his eye and tried to offer reassurance, but her face no longer knew how to lie. The fear she had hidden from him for years now lived in her gaze, unmistakable and raw. A nurse finally pulled her aside to sign forms. "We're going to move her to imaging as soon as possible," she said gently. "How soon as possible?" Juana asked. The nurse hesitated, and in that pause Juana felt the ground drop. She knew that hesitation. It meant they were behind before they had even begun. She returned to Lily's side and brushed her hair away from her face. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Lily opened her eyes briefly and managed a faint smile. "You always say that," she murmured, and Juana realized with terrifying clarity that this time her promise might be larger than her power. The decision was made without ceremony. A doctor stepped aside to make a call, returned with a tight expression, and said they were transferring Lily to the main medical center across town, where advanced imaging was available. No one used the word urgent, but every movement that followed spoke it clearly. They moved Lily onto a transport bed, tucking warm blankets around her as if comfort alone could change the outcome. Juana walked beside the gurney while orderlies pushed, her hand never leaving Lily's arm. William trailed behind, his phone clutched in a useless grip, numbers blurring on the screen as he tried to alert family he could not yet explain anything to. Outside, the ambulance waited with its back doors open, lights flashing without sound. Juana climbed in first, settling beside Lily as the doors closed behind them, sealing off the world they had known only an hour earlier. The ride was short, yet it stretched into something that felt without measure. Lily drifted in and out of awareness, murmuring words that made sense only to herself. Juana answered every sound with reassurance, though each bump in the road carried a reminder that time was not their ally. William followed in his car, hands locked on the wheel, ignoring traffic laws he had never broken before. He shouted Lily's name into the empty space of the driver's seat as if she could hear him through the night. When the ambulance finally slowed, Juana braced herself. This was the point of no return, the moment when hope would be forced to meet reality, and neither of them would emerge unchanged. The doors burst open, and Lily was rushed into a place that moved faster than sound. Curtains were pulled, carts collided, voices layered over one another in clipped phrases Juana had once spoken herself. Someone called out Lily's name and age. Another voice demanded previous records. A third counted backward while a monitor spat out numbers that refused to behave. Juana stood pressed against the wall, her hands stained with marker ink from Lily's wristband. Every fiber of her body leaned toward the bed, yet she was no longer in control. This was the part of medicine where parents became witnesses instead of protectors. William arrived moments later, breathless, his tie loosened, hair damp with sweat. He scanned the room in disbelief, as if it had been built just to break him. When Lily cried out, he lunged forward, only to be gently guided back by a nurse whose eyes carried practiced kindness. Machines crowded Lily's small frame until Juana could barely see her face. She focused on the rise and fall of Lily's chest, telling herself that motion meant life, that life meant possibility. Around her, the ICU surged forward without pause, and she felt smaller than she ever had in her career, not as a physician, but as a mother who could not reach her child. A cluster of physicians gathered just beyond the foot of Lily's bed, their voices low but urgent. They studied images that flickered across a nearby screen, pointing at shapes Juana recognized instantly and wished she did not. "She's too young for this pattern," one said. "But the pressure levels don't lie," another replied. "Something is interfering with normal flow." A third shook his head. "The location doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow what we usually see." They debated possibilities, as if rearranging words might rearrange reality. Juana stood within reach of them, hearing every phrase, every doubt, every gap in certainty. It was the language of professionals confronting something they could not yet solve, and it chilled her more than silence ever could. William listened without understanding the terms, but he recognized the tone. This was not routine. This was the sound of people who had reached the edge of their training and found nothing waiting for them there. The longer the doctor spoke in measured tones, the more William felt himself slipping away from the man he believed he was. He had faced hostile boardrooms, crushing negotiations, moments when entire companies depended on a single decision, yet none of those victories had prepared him for standing powerless beside his child. "What are you saying?" he demanded, stepping toward the group. "Tell me in words that don't hide behind charts." No one answered him at first. They glanced at one another, deciding who would carry the burden of clarity. The pause stretched until it broke something inside him. "Don't you dare look at each other like that," he shouted. "She is a little girl. She needs help now, not meetings." A nurse guided him back, her grip firm but compassionate. William pulled away, his hands trembling as tears finally spilled without permission. He pressed his palms to his face, breathing hard, the room closing in around him. Juana moved to him then, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders. For the first time since they met, she did not know what words could carry him through. All she could offer was her presence and the terrible awareness that everything they loved was balanced on what would happen next. The ICU had quieted into a tense stillness that carried more weight than the earlier chaos. Machines continued their steady rhythms, but the urgency that once drove every step had narrowed into something far more dangerous: uncertainty. Two doctors stood near the nurse's station, speaking just loudly enough for one another to hear. Their shoulders leaned inward, forming a small circle of privacy in a room where privacy rarely survived. "We've ruled out the usual causes," one said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Medication won't." William had drifted toward the vending machines at the far end of the corridor, not because he wanted anything to eat or drink, but because standing still beside Lily's room made his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the machine and closed his eyes, hoping for a moment of quiet. It didn't come. Fragments of conversation carried across the hallway. At first they were just background noise, but one word caught his attention, a surname spoken with the kind of respect he rarely heard outside boardrooms. He turned his head slightly, listening without meaning to intrude. The doctors were not discussing treatment plans anymore. Their tone had changed. It had become careful, almost reverent, as though they were speaking about someone who existed more as legend than colleague. "That technique was published years ago," one of them said. "Most of us thought it couldn't be repeated." William pushed himself upright. His heart thudded hard against his ribs, not from fear now, but from curiosity that edged toward hope. Whoever they were talking about mattered, and for the first time in hours, that mattered too. When the name finally reached him, it sounded unreal, like a story borrowed from a medical journal he would never read. "There's no one else with that success rate," a doctor said quietly. "She's the only one who's ever made it work." William let out a short laugh that startled even him. It echoed down the hall, too loud for the place they were in. "That's your solution?" he asked, stepping toward them. "One person in the entire world? You might as well tell me you're waiting for a miracle." The doctors exchanged glances, unsure whether to correct him or comfort him. William shook his head, smiling through tears that refused to stay hidden. "Find another way," he said. "I don't accept legends when my daughter is lying in there." Juana had been standing a few feet away, her arms folded tightly across her chest as if holding herself together required constant pressure. She had listened to every word, each sentence cutting closer to a truth she had buried for years. When William turned away in frustration, she took a step forward before she could talk herself out of it. "It's me," she said quietly. The words barely traveled across the space, yet they carried more weight than anything spoken all night. A nurse paused mid-stride. One of the doctors looked up confused. William turned slowly, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and concern. "What did you say?" he asked. Juana lifted her chin, her voice steadier than her hands. "The surgeon you're talking about, it's me." The corridor seemed to lose its sound all at once. Conversations nearby faded, replaced by a hush that pressed against every surface. The doctor stared at Juana as if she had stepped out of another life into this one. A nurse broke the stillness with the soft beep of a monitor alarm somewhere down the hall, then quickly silenced it. No one spoke. No one moved. The world waited for someone to decide whether what had just been said belonged to reality. William opened his mouth. closed it again, then searched her face as if trying to find the woman he married hidden behind the stranger now standing before him. "It can't be," William said at last, his voice low and uneven. "You told me you help people get through hard days. You never said—" "I never lied," Juana replied. "I just stopped leading with the parts of my life that changed the way people looked at me." The doctors began asking questions at once: where she had trained, when she last operated, how she knew the technique they were discussing. Juana answered each one calmly, her words steady despite the way her heart pounded inside her chest. William listened in silence as pieces of a hidden history assembled in front of him. He thought of every quiet moment they had shared, every time he had mistaken her humility for simplicity. The truth did not explode. It settled, heavy and undeniable, reshaping everything he believed about the woman he loved. William did not raise his voice when he asked her to step into the empty consultation room down the hall. That frightened Juana more than shouting ever could. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee, the kind that lingered long after the cup was gone. He closed the door behind them with deliberate care, as though afraid that any sudden movement might cause something inside him to break. For a moment, neither of them spoke. William leaned both hands on the narrow counter, staring at the surface instead of her. His shoulders rose and fell in slow, uneven breaths. The man who had commanded rooms full of investors now struggled to find words that would not wound the woman he loved. "How long?" he asked quietly. Juana swallowed. "William, how long have you been living another life?" he pressed, lifting his eyes at last. They were red, not from tears yet, but from holding them back. She had imagined this moment in fragments over the years, never in full. She had rehearsed explanations he hoped she would never need. None of them survived the weight of his gaze. "I never lived another life," she said. "I just didn't bring all of it home." He let out a breath that trembled. "You stood beside me every night. You ate at my table. You helped raise my daughter. And all that time you were carrying something this big without telling me?" Juana felt her chest tighten. "I was carrying us," she said, "the life we were building. I didn't want it to change the way you saw me." William shook his head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "It already has," he said, though his voice carried no anger, only grief for something he could not yet name. Outside the door, the hospital moved forward with its own urgent rhythm, unaware that in this small room, a marriage was being forced to redefine itself. William turned away from her and paced the length of the room, one hand dragging through his hair as though he were trying to wake himself from a dream that refused to end. The floor creaked beneath his steps, the only sound brave enough to fill the space between them. "I don't understand," he said at last. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me who you were. Was I just another person you had to protect yourself from?" Juana took a step toward him, then stopped. She could see how every memory they shared was being rearranged inside him, moments of laughter now shadowed by questions he never thought to ask. "I trusted you with my life," he went on, his voice rising. "But you kept a whole part of yourself locked away. How am I supposed to know what else I don't know?" The words hurt, because they were honest. He was not accusing her of deception. He was mourning the distance that had always existed without either of them seeing it. Juana finally closed the space between them, her composure giving way to the weight she had carried for years. Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I didn't hide from you because I doubted your love," she said. "I hid because I was tired of being measured before I was known. Every place I went, my name came first and my heart came last. I wanted one corner of my life where I could exist without explanation." Her eyes filled, tears blurring the room. "I was afraid that if you saw that side of me, I would disappear behind it, that I would become a story instead of a person." William listened in silence, his anger dissolving into something softer, more painful, the realization that her silence had never been about him at all. Juana drew a shaky breath and placed a hand over her chest, as though she needed to anchor the truth somewhere solid. "I hid my title, not my heart," she said. "Everything that mattered to me I gave you. My mornings, my fears, my love for Lily, the way I learned your moods before you spoke them. None of that was false." Her tears fell freely now, tracing paths she did not wipe away. "The name I carry in my work is not the woman you married. The woman you married is standing here, asking you to see her again." William's shoulders sagged, the tension that had held him upright finally loosening. He reached for a chair and sat, pressing his elbows to his knees, staring at the floor between his shoes. "I thought I lost you," he admitted. "Not today, long before today. I thought I married someone who didn't believe I was strong enough to hold all of her." Juana knelt in front of him, lifting his face until he had no choice but to meet her eyes. "You are the only person I trusted enough to protect the life I wanted," she said softly. "That is not weakness. That is faith." He exhaled slowly, as if learning how to breathe in this new truth. The space between them did not vanish, but it softened, no longer a wall, but a door beginning to open. "If Juana and William's moment of honesty has stirred something in you, I want you to pause and reflect for a second. Have you ever hidden a part of yourself out of fear of losing someone you loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what another viewer needs to read today. And if you haven't already, show your support for Mr. Cooper's stories by liking this video and staying with us for the rest of this unforgettable journey. The preparation room was small, bright, and unforgiving. It offered no comfort, only clarity. Stainless steel surfaces reflected Juana's face back at her from every angle, forcing her to confront the woman she had been and the one she was about to become again. She rolled up her sleeves and turned on the sink. The water rushed out hot, striking her hands with a sensation she had not felt in years. The motion was muscle memory, as natural. William found himself in a chapel he did not remember entering. The door was open, the room empty except for a single bench and a row of small lights along the wall. He sat down heavily, resting his forearms on his knees, staring at the floor as though it might offer answers he could not shape into words. He had never been a man of prayer. His life had taught him to trust contracts, schedules, and careful planning, systems that rewarded effort. But nothing in his world had prepared him for the helplessness of this moment, for loving someone whose fate was sealed behind closed doors. His hands folded without instruction, not in the practiced way he had seen others do, but clumsily, as if they were learning a language too late. "I don't know who I'm talking to," he said quietly, "but I need her to come back. I need my daughter to come back." His voice broke, the sound too fragile for the space around him. He spoke of Lily's laugh, of the way she leaned against his shoulder during movies, of the promise he had made to protect her after her mother died. Words tumbled out, with no structure, no bargaining, only need. When he finally fell silent, the room felt larger, as though it were holding his plea long after he had finished speaking. Outside the operating suite, 2 nurses waited beside a supply cart, pretending to organize instruments they had already counted twice. "Do you know who she is?" one whispered. The other nodded slowly. "I read her paper years ago. They said nobody could repeat what she did." They glanced toward the closed doors where Juana had disappeared moments earlier. To them, she was not William Kingsley's wife or Lily's mother. She was the woman whose name had been spoken in lecture halls with disbelief, whose work had shifted what was possible in rooms like this. "Do you think she can do it again?" the first nurse asked. The second hesitated before answering. "If anyone can, it's her." Time did not move forward in the waiting area. It pooled, it thickened, it clung to every second until each one felt like an hour that refused to finish. William returned from the chapel and sat in the same chair he had left, staring at the door that led nowhere he was allowed to go. Staff passed him without meeting his eyes. Families murmured in corners, each one carrying a story that could end in heartbreak. He checked his watch once, then again, then stopped entirely. Numbers could not measure what he was living through. Somewhere beyond that door, Juana was fighting a battle he could not witness, and Lily was trusting adults she barely knew to bring her back. The clock on the wall clicked loudly, its sound magnified by the silence around it. Every tick felt like a question that no one could answer. The doors did not swing wide. They parted slowly, as though even the building needed to gather courage before revealing what lay beyond them. William rose from his chair so quickly that the legs scraped against the floor, a sharp sound that made every head in the waiting area turn. He stood frozen, unsure whether stepping forward would bring him closer to his daughter or farther from the life he had known only hours earlier. A nurse emerged first, her mask pulled down to her chin, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She scanned the room until she found William and gave a small nod that was not yet a promise, only an invitation to hope. Behind her, Juana appeared. Her scrubs were marked with faint traces of the day, her hair tucked beneath a cap that no longer hid how tired she was. Yet she stood straight, her hands steady at her sides, as if every ounce of her strength had been reserved for this walk. William took one step toward her, then another. He did not run, he did not breathe. The room held him in place until the distance between them felt impossible to cross. Juana met his eyes. And in that silence, everything waited. Juana stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint lines exhaustion had drawn at the corners of her eyes. She did not smile. She did not soften the moment with hopeful language. She spoke plainly, because anything else would have felt dishonest after the hours they had lived through. "She's stable," Juana said. The words moved through the room like a wave. They did not sound loud, yet every person in earshot felt them. William blinked, uncertain that he had heard correctly. He leaned closer, as though the space between them might steal the meaning away. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice barely present. "It means she's alive," Juana replied. "And she's fighting." William's knees gave way without warning. One moment he was standing, clinging to the sound of Juana's voice, and the next he was sitting heavily on the floor, his back pressed against the wall as if gravity itself had finally released him. He covered his face with both hands, a sound escaping his chest that was neither laughter nor crying but something caught between survival and surrender. Nurses rushed forward asking if he was all right, but he could not answer them. He had spent the entire night holding himself together for Lily, for Juana, for the world that expected strength from him. Now, for the first time since the collapse, he was allowed to feel what relief truly cost. The group of physicians who had spent the night circling Lily's case stood nearby, watching William on the floor with an unease they were not trained to hide. One by one, they approached Juana, no longer as colleagues guarding their authority, but as people who understood they had witnessed something rare. "We should have recognized it sooner," one of them said quietly. His voice carried the weight of long experience, yet it trembled all the same. "Your insight changed the outcome. We were slow to see what was in front of us." Another doctor nodded in agreement. "You didn't just perform a procedure," she added. "You gave us a way forward we didn't know we had lost." Juana listened without triumph. She accepted their words with a gentle nod, knowing apologies mattered not because they restored pride, but because they restored trust. They let Juana see Lily before the rest of the world found out how close they had come to losing her. The room was quiet, bathed in a low light that felt kinder than anything she had known that night. Lily lay still beneath layers of clean sheets, her face pale but peaceful. Juana approached slowly, as if loud movement might undo everything. She took Lily's small hand in hers, careful not to disturb the lines that now kept watch over her body. "You stayed with me," Lily murmured without opening her eyes. Juana bent close enough for Lily to feel her breath. "Always," she whispered back. For the first time since the pain began, Lily slept without fear, her fingers curled around the woman who had carried her through the darkest hours of their lives. Recovery did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, in the way Lily learned to sip water again without feeling dizzy, in the way she smiled at nurses who had become familiar faces, in the way Juana stopped flinching every time a monitor changed its tone. Days settled into a rhythm shaped by small victories. Physical therapists coaxed Lily to sit up a little longer each morning, a chalkboard outside her room filled with handwritten encouragements from staff who had watched her fight. William read aloud from Lily's favorite books while she rested, his voice steady now, no longer afraid to carry joy into a room that had once felt too fragile to hold it. Juana lived between the roles she had kept separate for years. She answered clinical questions with ease when doctors consulted her, then brushed Lily's hair with the same tenderness she had shown long before anyone knew her name. The hospital became less of a battlefield and more of a place where healing learned how to live. One afternoon, Lily asked for pancakes. Juana laughed, startled by the request, then promised to bring some the next morning if the nurses agreed. William watched them from the doorway, his heart easing into a future he had almost lost. The crisis had passed, but its echo remained, not as fear, but as gratitude that touched everything it reached. The press conference was meant to celebrate Lily's recovery, but the room shifted the moment William stepped to the podium. Cameras clicked, reporters leaned forward. Yet he did not begin with numbers or forecasts or the careful phrases he once used to manage attention. "My daughter is alive today because of one woman," he said, his voice carrying across the room with clarity he had earned the hard way. He turned toward Juana, who stood a few feet behind him, uncertain whether this was truly her moment. "This is my wife," he continued, "and this is Dr. Juana Rao." A hush swept through the room. The same people who had once dismissed her now scribbled notes with sudden urgency. Juana felt the weight of eyes on her again, but this time it did not feel like a burden. It felt like acknowledgement. William stepped aside and reached for her hand. "She never asked for recognition," he added. "She only asked for a chance to save our family. Today, I want the world to know who she really is." The headlines that followed told only part of the story. They spoke of breakthroughs and rare skill, of a surgeon who returned just in time. But the truth lived in quieter places, in the nurses who now listened more carefully when a calm voice spoke, in the parents who watched the people around them with new respect. Juana returned to Lily's room that evening and found a drawing taped to the wall. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. No titles were written. No achievements were listed, just 3 hearts touching. Strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly at the edge of a crowded room. Sometimes it pours lemonade instead of giving speeches. And sometimes the people we underestimate are the ones carrying the weight of everyone else's hope. Lily was discharged on a clear morning when the sky looked too generous for anything bad to follow. She held Juana's hand in one of hers and William's in the other, her steps small but determined as they walked through the hospital doors together. At home, the house greeted them with the quiet they had once taken for granted. Lily headed straight for the kitchen, insisting on sitting at the table even though the couch waited nearby. Juana poured juice while William flipped the old griddle back on, filling the room with a familiar sound that meant safety. They did not speak much. They did not need to. Every movement carried a shared understanding that this was the life they had almost lost, the ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary simply because they were still here to live them. If Juana, William, and Lily's journey has moved you even a little, I invite you to take action right now. Press the like button so this story can reach more people who need hope. Share it with someone who believes in quiet strength. Subscribe to Mr. Cooper Stories so you never miss a message about love, courage, and second chances. And in the comments below, tell us, what moment in this story stayed with you the longest?